Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how to begin working with pivot tables. A pivot table is a summary of data that you can create really quickly, and it's really flexible. So the example that I'm going to use is a spreadsheet that I own that has a list of products and where they're made. And with each one of those products and where they're made, I have the minimum wage of the country it was made in, along with the environmental ranking of the country. So say if I want to answer the question, is there a correlation between the minimum wage and the number of clothing items that we have in our closets? I could try to answer that through a pivot table. So to begin, I need to select the data that I want to create a table for. So there are a few ways to do this. The first way is just old school, click and drag and select all the data. Second way is I could click up here in this magic box up here, top left, it'll select the entire sheet. Another way is to click and drag the headers, which will select all the way down the columns. Or I can click in a cell and do a Control A on a Windows machine, or Apple A on a Mac, and it will select just the data range. Okay. Once I have my data selected, I go to Data and Pivot Table, and I need to put this pivot table in an existing sheet or a new sheet. I'm going to click New Sheet here. It's going to create a new tab down at the bottom, and I get the beginnings of a table to be constructed. So I need to go over here to the right hand side to the Pivot Table Editor, and I'm going to start adding rows and using these buttons over here to construct my data to answer my question. So I can click on this Add Rows, and remember the question I'm trying to answer is is there a correlation between the minimum wage of a country and the likelihood of our clothing being made in that country. So I click Add, and first thing I want to do is bring in where the countries of the clothing are made. And what it brings back is the unique values from our data range. Okay, so you can see that they are sorted in alphabetical order here. And then if I go back to the original data table, you can see where the countries are made is column C. And I have a lot of repeat countries in here. But what the pivot table does is just brings back the unique. So it doesn't list Argentina twice, Bangladesh twice, or 10 times, or the number of times it's in the data set. It only brings it back once, which is good. So the next thing I need to do is think about what am I trying to compare that to. And obviously in this scenario I want to add the minimum wage. Right? So it builds a column next to that with the minimum wage of each country. And if I go back to my original data set, I have a lookup that's looking up the minimum wage of each one of those countries. So Vietnam, China, Indonesia, so on and so forth. And that just brings it back in the pivot table right next to it. Right? And to get used to using pivot tables, don't be afraid to check and uncheck and use these drop downs. You really have to play with the data to get it the way you want. So you're not really going to mess anything up because you're not messing with the original data source. Okay, so what I can do here, it's showing these rows underneath each country for total. So I can uncheck that totals box to get rid of those unnecessary rows. Next thing I can do is I have Iceland here that is empty. So if I go down, I can filter that off by just showing, by getting rid of the blanks underneath that filter. So now I only have countries that I have the minimum wage for in my table. All right. The next thing I want to do is count the number of items that were made in each country. So if I go up here, I can add, or I can do some counts, and that's under the values. So I click add, and then I want to count the countries where each one of these were made. And I can see that now I have the number of items for each country. So you can see that 17 of the clothing items in this original data source were made in China. And then what I can do is go up here and I can sort by the count. And you can see now I did it ascending order, 1 up to 17 with my grand total at the bottom. I can change that to descending if I'd like, and now I have all that data sorted by highest number of items to lowest number. All right, so I can eyeball this now to see if there is a correlation between minimum wage and the number of clothing items. All right, and this would be difficult because I'm really just getting an eyeball view. So 17, where the minimum wage is 98 cents an hour, but maybe with some of the higher ones, and maybe I don't have enough data to really get a scientific answer to this question, but is there a correlation based on this data set? It's still a little bit difficult to tell just by eyeballing it. What I can do though is, if I still don't get the answer from my pivot table, Google Sheets adds this explore button down here. And what it does, it tries to guess what data and answers I'm looking for. So you can see that I can go up here and ask the question. I can say correlation between where the country where the clothing item was made and the hourly minimum wage. Okay, and it gives me a chart to answer that. So I could use that chart or I can use one of the charts that they've automatically made based on my data. So I can choose one of these if I'd like. I can preview it. Right? So again, it's just playing with data, viewing the different charts, and the nice thing about this is you can build them really quickly and you can play with the data to figure out if it answers your question or not. But I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to do the correlation between the count and the minimum wage, and I'm going to insert this chart, and it gives me a scatter plot chart. So I can move this to its own sheet, and I can see that, well, the higher the number of items, so that my counts are down at the bottom here along the horizontal axis. So I have 6, 9, and 17, and all those higher numbers are under $2 an hour minimum wage. So there seems to be a correlation between minimum wage and where our clothing is made. Okay, so in future videos I will try to explain pivot tables in more depth and with more complex data.